Hello?
Hi, everybody.
Is this thing on?
Is this thing on?
This thing is on.
Can you check sound? Are we good?
I will check when it comes through on here, but we should be all right. Let's assume we're good, and I will adjust if not.
Okay. Hi, everybody. It's sunny here in Vancouver. I hope it is lovely weather wherever you guys are. We've come to the end.
We have come to the end
of our 6 weeks.
The climax, the resolution, the denouement.
This is the denouement, I would say. Yes, that's
where we reflect on where we've got to.
And tie up any loose ends.
Yes.
And also make a bit of a gesture towards the future. So why don't we start maybe there? A reminder that you will not lose access to these course materials or to these Google Hangouts, which will get archived. You will be able to come back to this material again and again. We have reassurances from edX that as long as their platform is up, you've paid, you will have access to this stuff. Discussion will shut down a week from today, Andrew, is that right?
Yes.
You're squinting like there's a problem.
There's a message saying Hangouts on Air is going away later this year. That's nothing.
Let's not worry about that right now. I'm going to make that go away. Sorry, guys.
I need to know about that, though, for future.
Yeah, you do.
Everyone, Google keeps changing things all the time. So annoying. Just
problems.
Make something and keep it forever. Is that too much?
That's not how technology works.
I know, it's not. Continuing.
Discussions, yes. So the discussions will be archived and still viewable.
The discussions are archived
and still viewable. We'll shut down for sort of participation.
I believe Friday night is the last time.
Was it Friday? No, not a week today.
Post.
Okay.
I believe it's this Friday night.
Yeah. Okay. But anyway, you'll be able to come back. And certainly with this course in particular, there was never an expectation that you would have completed a draft within 6 weeks.
No,
that would be insane, and you would probably be dead. But the idea is you can go back and revisit as you need to as you continue to work on your course. Future courses that we are offering coming up in September will be structure and outlines. So if you haven't taken that course yet, even if you've done this one, it's not really cart before horse.
They're not incompatible in this direction.
No, not at all. Many of the writers that we interviewed just talked about doing a sort of a messy kind of blurting out of everything that was in their head, and then they went back and structured and kind of imposed that on the pages that they already had. So that's definitely a way to work. And then for those of you who have taken these first 2 courses already and are eagerly awaiting the third, we'll be running that one in January,
which is enough time to continue working on your drafts, because it's all about the rewriting process.
It's all about the rewriting.
Get as much out as you can.
Yeah, so that's a course where we wouldn't necessarily recommend that you go into that with nothing.
No, that you can't go into that with nothing. It would be very difficult.
You wouldn't be able
for
to
you
do the work.
work.
Well, no, because the assignments are built around revising material that you already have. But there's lots of time between now and January to get a lot further along with your drafts. And also great good news, in September, Nancy Lee will be back with us live on these Hangouts. So if you have another course to take still with us, you will get to see Nancy's lovely smiling face.
Yes.
We have missed her. So let's dig into week 6.
All right. So first, for the final assignment,
yes,
we asked you to apply a tool of analysis to your writing and then discuss your key learnings from the exercise. Many of you were able to hone in on problem areas with your novels, from needing to do more research to needing to know your characters better to identifying more granular problems with scenes, and hopefully some solutions too.
Yes, yes.
Yeah, so we had a few comments that we'd like to share. Kay Long said, identifying my style/tendencies helped me get meta on how I struggle and craft. I love the epic, elegant, and exquisite. That's a good sentence. With underdog overtones and a bit of magic.
Underdog overtones. I'm sorry, I just like that too.
There's some poetry in that sentence there, Kaya.
Yes, like it.
A bit of magic. Morrison, Erdrich, Dickens. So it was not a surprise that with this exercise, I was able to articulate my main problems as pitfalls. Not boredom, but general overwhelm. And not having the skill to stitch together the in-betweens. My lens is always stuck in either panorama or times 10K intimate. My zooming capacity is yet to be built. Until then, I'm more clunk than elegance.
And that's really common, I think, for all novelists, right? It's handling the scope of the thing.
Yeah.
Overwhelm is a real issue, I think. And it becomes a question of knowing how to break it down into those sort of bite-sized pieces that you can work on, and sort of, it's almost like keeping your eyes down as you work on that one thing so that you don't look up and see the great sea that you're floating in and realize you don't know if you can swim all that way.
Bird by bird, as Anne Lamott called it. That's the origin of the title.
Bird by bird?
Is it bird by bird?
I don't know that expression.
And Anne Lamott has a book about writing, which we have on our list, and I think it's called Bird by Bird.
That must be one of Nancy's.
One of Nancy's.
I don't know that.
But basically, her son was doing an assignment about birds, and he was overwhelmed by the amount of work he had to do. And his father said, "Let's just take it bird by bird."
Oh, good.
And
I was worried it was somehow something to do with like killing birds or something. Just
No.
call that flock bird by bird. I was
Not
like,
with stones.
Where are you going with that?
No. Bird by bird, bit by bit.
Night Owl says, the main
Speaking of
problem in
birds.
my draft, speaking of birds, Night Owl, our night bird, this was fun. If I had to say, my main problem would be needing to get a draft fully hammered out. Not one, but many scenes needed there. Ratcheting up the suspense, again, not just one scene, but spreading that across many. A passive female character, bane of my life, but she needs room to grow, but not that much room, but also not a single scene. I chose the opening scene. What am I looking for in it? What must it do for me? And why do I not have a firm grip over where the novel begins? These are great questions. And the passive character is, again, I'm not even going to zoom in on female particularly, but just passive characters.
I've written passive
general,
male characters in droves.
They can be a problem because, and I have a psychological theory about why this is. I think people who are writers are naturally watchers. We watch. We listen. We love to eavesdrop. The people at the next table at the coffee shop. We love to listen to people on buses. We love to watch the way people dress and interact and all of these things. We sit back and we notice, right?
Yeah.
But then when we go to put that into our characters, and it's very common to write characters who are built out of the same cloth as you yourself are, cut from the same cloth. These become those watcher, witness, potentially passive characters. So it's a really common pitfall. I think it comes from a really natural place in us as writers. And you have to work to sort of say, okay, within that particular personality, if that's who my protagonist is, how can I just put a little bit more pressure on them to up the conflict a little? It's neat to think of in the context of something like a detective novel, where in a way, that's what the character has to do. That's their job. They have to notice, they have to watch, they have to observe. But think about the choices that they make in doing that. And can you extrapolate that beyond the detective novel to, other novels where you might have a Nick Carraway character, like in Great Gatsby, where he's watching, but he's also participating at certain key points. And he's engaging in his own little subplots that are kind of mirroring what's happening in the story that he's watching. So you need to look for those opportunities to make those watcher characters, as opposed to passive characters, just a little bit more active.
Mm-hmm. And another thing I'd say is often as writers, we strongly identify with our protagonist. And in real life, you don't want bad things to happen to people you care about or people you identify with. So it's a natural instinct sometimes to shy away from upping the tension, from making terrible things happen, from pushing them into corners. But that's where you get your drama. So again, another thing to notice.
And not only
making
terrible things happen, but making them do terrible things.
Yes, that too.
And I think that can be a really tough one, because you want your character to be a good person. You don't want them to be morally compromised. But morally compromised that's horsepower for a novel, right?
That was a horse.
That was horsepower. That was an automotive analogy, Andrew.
That was an engine.
It was not a horse.
It was an engine. Okay.
That was an internal combustion engine. Jackie Morrison says, from this exercise, I learned I need to do way more research on police procedures. I have a better than average understanding because I work in the court system, but I need to research more before I complete the draft. I also need to work on theme. And I started thinking about that, and I jotted a few little notes in this on the side there. I was thinking, what are sort of recurring themes that we see when we're looking at detective fiction, when we're looking at police procedurals, when we're looking at thrillers? And it's often questions around guilt, around complicity,
morality. There's often
what connects the investigator to the crime.
There's often a theme also, in police procedurals about what the work does to the person involved. I mean, very often you see a detective or a police officer who is scarred or wounded,
alcoholic
somehow.
or whatever.
And a lot of it has to do with the work and how they believe it's so important. They can't, and what it does to them. Yeah.
I'm thinking of something like the Prime Suspect series. If anybody remembers season 1, there was a wonderful echoing between she's hunting down a sadistic serial killer who preys on women, And she herself is dealing with issues of misogyny in the police force.
Yeah.
So there is a lovely little echoing going on there. So I think those are all things that you might think about when you're dealing with theme. It's not that you've got to go out and reach for something artificial that you're going to shoehorn in. Yeah. And the other thing, of course, that can come up is as your investigator is getting many versions of the night in question, what happened, what were you doing that night? Or what were you doing that night? Then we get the idea of the unreliable witness, or the way in which people interpret reality or experience reality differently. So look for the natural fits thematically with the material that you're using. And I think let it sort of percolate up rather than thinking, I must now insert a theme, tab A into slot B, and my theme will be capitalism. It's like, no. Look from what you already have. Look from what's inherent in the genre that you're writing, and that would be my suggestion.
Yeah.
Procrastination.
Yes. Oh, this joke is getting a little old, but I'm going to say it anyway. We were going to talk more about this, but we didn't get around to it.
I think we need to retire this joke. Every week when we've talked about procrastination, we've made that joke.
Yeah, I need something better.
Yeah.
I'll get around to that.
You'll get around to it.
Oh, God. Dad jokes, yes. Okay. Anyway, seriously, procrastination is something that we all struggle with, and the assignment generated a lot of responses. Some people talked about constant distractions of our age, such as internet, smartphones, and social media.
Mm-hmm.
Others admitted being more distracted by researching their novels than by the outside world, which I found interesting. The call was coming from inside the house. Allison R. says, research is my most persistent distraction. Many a time I've opened a web browser to answer a small question and have spent 30 minutes following a chain of hyperlinks. A technique I've heard of but haven't had the discipline to try is to write down research questions as they occur to me, mark them in the draft, and move on. If I tried that, I could have a separate writing session dedicated to looking up those answers and filling them in. A grad student here told me, and you will probably know what this is, that there is an app that you can get on your smartphone where it actually denies you access to the internet until you have written whatever number of words you program in that you want to complete. So when you finished your 500 words or your 200 words or your 1,000 words, then you can go back on, but not before. Can you remember what that's called? Is it Liberate? Is that the word? No. Website blocker. Yeah, there's one called Liberate. It's a website blocker.
I think there's more than one of them out
there. There's
more
than one.
So if you really want to go sort of, I'm sure there's something that you can do on your computer as well, on your laptop or whatever as well.
Yeah, there's software that if you can't do it. I know that the writer Jeff Vandermeer mentioned to us when he was a writer in residence that when he's deep into writing his novel, he gets his wife to unplug and hide his Wi-Fi box in the house so that he can't access the internet at all for months.
It's inconvenient for her, I have to say.
Well, perhaps they have too. I don't know. Or, I mean, with nowadays, you could probably set a password and just, restrict access.
Yeah, I mean, if the internet is calling you and that's generally an issue, there's ways to circumvent that. Certainly, if it's more a question that you feel as though you can't keep writing unless you figure that detail out, you need to learn coping strategies. And that's not so much an internet thing. That's just how do I carry on writing when I don't know, my characters are having a meal and they're drinking glasses of water, and is it glass, and where does the water come from? And it's like, you do need to make your piece in some drafts saying, you know what, I don't know. Just put a sticky tab there or whatever, and let me carry right on, and I'm going to go back and check that. But do I need to solve what kind of cookware they have in order to play out the dialogue and the conflict in the scene? No, you probably don't.
It would have to be a very, very specific type of scene for that to matter. Yeah.
Yes. I'm leaving you because I hate these ceramics. I told you I like white glazed, not red glazed.
But white glaze wasn't invented until 40 years later.
That's right.
Okay.
All these problems.
All right, some other plans for dealing with procrastination or hitting the wall. B. Thomasa said listening to relaxing music, non-lyrical music helped them. Buddhist meditation music, Lakota flute music, some sounds of nature. Namaferd wrote that they were experiencing what Shauna Singh Baldwin described as getting stuck at the 50-page mark. I will try her advice to go off and read something unrelated and then riff on my character's connections to that topic. It seems like a great idea to get out of a rut and see your character differently.
That's a neat idea. Yeah, I like that one. And then finally, Cheryl Optimist has made peace with procrastination, as befits her username. Personally, she says, I think hitting the proverbial wall is a good thing for me. I'm okay with it. Lots of times I will go for a walk and a good idea arrives. I liken it to typing. Have you ever been typing away and all of a sudden you slow down considerably and realize that you've made a typo a few words back? So you go back and fix it and then race on again. I think the subconscious knows first and the fingers second. So when I hit a writer's wall, I wonder if I've missed something. So I give myself permission to take a break and regroup. Seems to work for me.
Mhm.
That's a really neat analogy.
And there's different types of walls, I think. So I mean, I know for sure that when I am writing, if I'm in a writing session over several days, every day that I'm doing it, there'll be a certain point where I just can't come up with anything good anymore, and I just have to stop.
Mhm.
And then I would do other things and fill the well, as they say again.
That's the Hemingway, the famous Hemingway thing. Don't ever empty the well.
Right. But I mean, I'll go to one. Well, I can tell until I can tell that it's whatever I'm doing is either like pulling teeth or it's just uninspired. And then usually a good night's sleep, and then the next day I'm able to see it differently.
There's a writer who's suggested stopping your writing in the middle of a sentence so that when you sat down, I can't remember who that was. Can you?
It wasn't.
So that when
Hemingway
you sit down,
again,
it wasn't
was
Hemingway, no. But when you sit down again the next day, you've got to kind of easy in because it's like, well, I'm just going to finish this sentence, and then you're writing and you're off. So I've never tried doing that because I've never felt the need. But
I usually read the last little bit that I wrote just to get back into the feel of it again, and then keep going.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, the danger with that is you don't want to go back too far and start fiddling with what you've written as much as you want to just catch up.
Yeah, it's more to catch yourself up.
Because that's how you can get stuck under 50 pages. Yes, you're just circling around and around and around again. Okay, we have some Hangout questions.
Let's dive in.
Kay
Do you want me to read,
Long.
or do you want to read?
Sure. Kay Long writes about socially constructed gender and its limitations. I've listened to Louise Erdrich reading a Lori Moore story, and in the pre-interview, she says that Moore gets men so well. I think I know what she means, but do you have any suggestions for how to write insightfully into the aspects of characters that might be impeded by the constraints of our own lived experiences and constructed identities? Specifically as relates to gender-based identity. I'm currently reading Alexander Chee's essays, How to Write an Autobiographical Novel, and I'm really loving his voice. To me, it speaks directly to one of my main male characters. But I don't know if that's just me projecting, or if I'll ever get my understanding to come across in my own writing. What are some approaches that you've taken? Do you have any favorite works that have influenced your own sensitivity to gender constructs in your characters?
That's a really interesting one, and it's a big question because I think more and more we're understanding that gender is absolutely a spectrum, and we only have our own little sort of experience of what it is to be us, and there's so many other ways, other forms of gender expression. I mean, to go very, very obvious, I've written from a male point of view, and I ran stuff past my husband.
Yeah, and I've written from a female point of view. My wife gave me insight into things that I might have been missing.
And what is that? Those are sensitivity readers, really. Yeah. They're telling you whether you've put your foot in it or not. So, I mean, I think that is an obvious place to begin.
And reading is so important. I mean, if you are if you're a writer that wants to write a piece from another gender and you haven't read a lot of work written by women, for example, and you're a male writer, then you're missing out on a perspective. You're missing out entirely. And the more you read, the more you'll be able to sort of internalize some of that stuff. Especially reading memoirs, diaries, things like that, not just fiction.
Nonfiction, yeah.
Nonfiction.
But also fiction let's say that you are not, genderqueer and you want to write a non-binary character, go read some Ivan Coyote. I mean, go look for models for the voice that you want to write, and always keep a sensitivity reader in mind. I think the other thing that can be kind of interesting is like a historical perspective or a cultural perspective when you're writing about, maybe it's you're a woman and you want to write a female perspective, but 300 years ago, and again, I think the research piece is really going to come into play there. You can't so much go out and get a sensitivity read for that, but can you look at stuff that was written at that time? You sure can.
Oh yeah,
to get a sense
all sorts of source materials.
Yeah,
not just novels, but
newspapers
are amazing. Letters, personal letters are really interesting. A lot of them are collected. There's collections of letters from people, and people used to write a lot to each other, right? It's well-educated people anyway.
Yeah. So you can pick up a lot from those secondary research sources that will give you a sense of, the difference in shape, the shape of a woman's life today versus, or a man's life today versus a man's life, in the Middle Ages.
Oh yeah.
For instance, there's so much research you can do. I will never forget. There's a wonderful book called The Waning of the Middle Ages by Huizinga, I think was the last name. He was a Dutch writer. And in the first page, he goes on to this long thing about how it used to be considered manly to cry, and how in medieval times men would cry to show emotion. And that, and he was talking about when that kind of changed. And, it's really, really interesting, those shifts that happen within just a few generations. So research, sensitivity readers, and reading primary source material, which is not stuff that was written later about that time, but stuff that was written actually at that time, even if it's not directly in the subject matter that you're looking at. Kay Long also asks about writer self-care. What are your rituals? Do you have any self-care rituals that you follow? Have you found that when you're writing, you need to have snacks handy, or a pre/post stretch session? I notice that I forget to breathe properly, and I need to get up moving every so often. Do you put your cat out, if you have any, or take care of certain round-the-house tasks before you write in order to reduce distractions? Water the plants, feed the fish, bring in the mail. And then what about more emotional or internal aspects of writing? Have you ever needed to take up bowling or mahjong, say, in order to be in a world unrelated to your novel's world and its visceral experiences? Do you ever need to intentionally, physically, symbolically, ceremonially, that's a blank piece of paper, contain your writing world and its characters' trials and travails in order to have space for your own piece? If so, how do you? How has self-care changed for you over time? See what I did there? I read the tricky question so that you would have to answer it.
That's okay. I have some thoughts. Because my writing time is less than it used to be, I haven't felt the need to do a lot to get into it, as much as just when I have a chance, sit down and write, because I have limited time, so I have to sort of push through. So I will try to, often I'm writing on a ferry in the morning because it's early in the morning and it's fairly quiet. I have noise canceling headphones that I use to try and keep out the outside world sometimes. I do sometimes try and get up and move so that my back doesn't get too sore. I also find that if I am doing quite a bit of writing and I need a break, I will do some sort of task that I've done a lot before, so that, and there's actually brain science behind this. If you're doing something where you can use the automatic part of your brain, the creative part of your brain is more free to make associations. So if I mow the lawn, mowing the lawn is great actually, because I can stop. I have my phone with me, and every time I have a thought that's useful about whatever I'm writing, I'll stop and I will write it on my phone.
It takes him 4 hours to mow the lawn.
It sometimes takes me a while. I'm standing there in the middle of in the shower. Also, I find I get good ideas.
You take your phone in the shower?
No, but it's next to the shower. So if I have a good idea, I will finish in my shower. I will run out and I would quickly type it in before I forget it.
Okay.
I also don't trust my memory. So when I have a good idea about something, whether it's going on a walk or something, I will always note it down immediately, because I have learned the hard way that I will think, I'll remember that later. And then later I'll just remember that I had a good idea. And the thing itself will often be gone.
Interesting.
Yeah, so it's that sort of self-care. It's also sort of just understanding how I work.
Self-care and rituals, I think, can get, if you're not careful, tied up with procrastination.
They certainly can. That's one thing I noticed here, the whole idea about taking care of around-the-house tasks, et cetera, that can start sucking into writing time. If you have a certain amount of writing time, it's probably better to let your house rot at that moment.
At that moment,
let it be, and just do the writing.
When I was a student and I had all the time in the world, I had so many conditions before I could have a good writing day. I had to have a 4-hour block. It had to be silent. I had to, all of this things that I had to have. And then parenthood came along, and all of a sudden I was down to, okay, I have to brush my teeth. And I always had to start a writing day by brushing my teeth. I don't even do that anymore. You don't want to know that, do you? But I no longer have to brush my teeth. I grab the time as it comes. But in order to sort of replenish, like you say, when you get to the end of the useful workday, I found nothing beats exercise. And that sounds like a kind of eye-rolling thing that nobody wants to hear. You want me to say you need to go eat 70% dark chocolate, right? Because that's really the key. That's the thing that'll do it for you.
It is.
It's not running was always the best thing for me, or whatever your form of exercise is, because you are sort of, I think it's kind of like what you're saying, the brain can still go. You're kind of physically, you're doing something that's so different and is engaging a different part of your brain. And it's just good for you.
Yeah.
And we sit a lot as writers.
We do sit a lot as writers. Yeah, keeping healthy is important.
Yeah. Yeah, but I mean, in a way, sort of, self-care is a good thing. Rituals, not too many. Not too many.
Yeah, and that also reminds me of people who get fancy writing books and things like that. It's like,
if it helps you write, great.
But if it doesn't, if it's a procrastination
Mm-hmm.
or if it slows you down, maybe consider just doing that. I mean, I remember, was it Jeff Vandermeer talking about that? Again, Jeff Vandermeer. He was writing on leaves at one point. He was on a walk, right? And like,
oh yeah.
Whenever the writing comes to him,
story.
he'll write it whenever he can get. Like he's not going to wait till he has his journal. Yeah. Okay. Carpenter Cynthia 71. This one's for you, Annabelle. So I shall read it. I will purchase Encore Edie for my godson in the near future. He's 7. I have just given him his first book to read at bedtime with Mom, and he loves it.
Oh.
My friend Kristen's novel called Dragon Canyon. He has a big brother who has Down syndrome. Do you have any recommendations for him as a younger reader until he grows into reading about Edie?
Thank you very much for the question, Carpenter Cynthia 71. One of the reasons I wrote the Edie books, I grew up with an elder brother with Down syndrome, and one of the reasons that I wanted to write this series of books was because I, as a kid, didn't know any literature that was written for me that sort of spoke to the situation that I found myself in. Having said that, I did a little bit of a Google before coming on here because times have changed and there's a little bit more out there. There's actually not as much as one might hope for, but a couple that I thought might be interesting for your godson as a little boy with an older brother who's got Down. So I was looking more for the boy stuff. There's an interesting looking book called, that's an X, Sing Fox to Me by Sarah Kanake, Kanake, and that's set in, it's a boy and he's got an older brother with Downs and they go to visit their crazy old uncle in Tasmania, and that looks really cool. That's mid-grade. And another mid-grade one that looks really neat was called Marcus Vega Doesn't Speak Spanish by Pablo Cartaya, Cartaya, and again, it's the younger brother, older brother with Downs. And those both looked pretty lively and pretty suitable for the age. I think I would always recommend that you read the book yourself first before giving it to the kid. And certainly I would suggest that with Encore Edie as well. I think 7's probably too young. It is very much a book that looks not only at sort of the pleasure of being around somebody with Down syndrome, but also the struggle of being a sibling and, you know, things that you come up against that are kind of hard to speak about because you feel a little bit selfish when you speak about them. So it's, you know, it's got its little darker aspects. And, you know, for me as a sibling, it's something that I would have wished to have seen in literature, but at the same time, it's also, these are kind of hard truths. So I would say read it yourself first so that you're prepared for what you're going into. But those other two looked a little bit more kind of fun and more boy, if you will. My book's definitely girl with a girl cousin, right? So good luck. I would say also, if you have a good children's bookstore wherever you live in Vancouver, definitely it would be kids books with knowledgeable booksellers. Go talk to them and see what they recommend. I found kids bookstores, generally you get a more educated and a more knowledgeable bookseller than you do at your average, you know, Chapters or Indigo. Yeah. They really take what they do seriously and should be able to point you to some more titles.
Yeah, they would definitely have a good sense.
Shall I read this one and then you can answer it?
What?
Yes. Cosgrove Reinhardt says, many of the authors in the course videos this week talk about reading if they are stuck and not writing. Do you have any suggestions about what we should be reading? Is there a reading list that aspiring authors should work their way through to expose themselves to different styles and genres? Or should we seek out the best writers in the genre that we're writing in? How do we determine who are the acknowledged contemporary and perhaps not so contemporary masters of fiction in the various genres? I've enjoyed the course and look forward to taking the third and final course in January, hopefully with a complete draft in hand. We will look forward to seeing you again.
Yes.
Cosgrove Reinhardt. Reading list. What do you think?
Yeah, what I do is, I mean, there is no one reading list that you should work through. I mean, there used to be the canon, right? The idea that there was the Western literary canon. It was very heavy on the older male white authors, and I think we've moved along from that quite a ways.
Mhm.
I would suggest what I would do, depending on the genre, but what I would do is one way you could do it is look at awards lists. If you want to get a quick survey of books that have been making a splash, look at the awards in your genre. So for science fiction, you might look at the Hugos or the Nebula Awards. For detective fiction, is it the Edgars?
I think that's right.
And there's different ones in different countries, so it depends. And not just the winners, but the shortlists are often very useful, because sometimes really interesting books aren't always winners, but make it to the shortlists. I mean, I remember at one point when I was younger, I had a jag of going through and reading Booker Prize shortlisted books, but not the winners. I was really curious about books that had made it up there but didn't quite get
Well,
in.
it's really interesting because often the winner will not be anybody of the jurors' first pick. It'll
It
be
will
the
be the
compromise.
compromise pick.
It'll be the one they can agree on, and
Those of us
there
who've been
might
on
be
juries
another
know.
one on that short list that was actually the one that a particular juror was passionate about, but they just couldn't persuade the others. So that's not to denigrate people who win awards, but just to say there is depth within those lists.
Yeah, and so that's something. I like to read in the genre that I'm writing in, definitely, to just sort of, I mean, you need to know what's going on and what sort of stuff's being done. I also like to occasionally just go somewhere wildly different. I am not writing literary fiction right now, but the last year or 6 months or so, I've been looking at contemporary female fiction writers.
That's why you're reading Lauren Groff.
And also Atesha Moshfegh and Sally Rooney and what's her name?
That other woman.
We've talked about her a whole bunch of times. Goon Squad, Jennifer Egan.
Jennifer Egan.
And anyway, so I mean, and because I'm curious about good writing, you know, and also sometimes, I mean, I think for me, there's two things. First of all, there's one, reading in the area that you're interested in and writing in, and B, also reading something completely different just to be reading something good. Because you never know when inspiration is going to hit you. You never know when influence is going to help. And also, sometimes you may need a break from the sort of area that you're writing in. If you're writing a dark crime-ridden novel, occasionally you might want to read a light comedy of manners, right? Just as a break.
Yeah. And I would just add to that, I mean, I think we read for many different reasons, and we've talked about reading for many different reasons within the scope of these courses. And it's helpful to know why you're reading a particular book, I think. It's not just, I'm going to read this now, but like, as I read this, I am watching for fill in the blank. I am looking for how someone has treated a subject matter similar to what I'm dealing with, so that when I go to pitch my synopsis to an agent or a publisher, I can say, you know, it's in the tradition of this particular book, but what it does differently is this. Or maybe it's, I'm trying to write within a thriller subgenre that I've never tried before. I'm going to go back and read this book from the 1920s, which was a seminal text in that tradition, and I'm going to educate myself in the history of the genre and how it's evolved. You know, there can be many different reasons. And I think that taking that historical perspective is always a good idea. I always say, like, if you wanted to be a singer-songwriter, you got to go listen to Elvis. Whether or not you like Elvis really doesn't matter. I mean, it's part of your education in the genre. So liking a book is not a reason to read it or not to read it. I think you have to think about, what specifically am I reading for? This will not ruin reading for you. I mean, it's not like all of a sudden it's going to become work and you're never going to enjoy reading and you're never going to want to read a book again because you're always looking for something. I think it deepens your reading, and it deepens your understanding, and it deepens the dialogue of your own work with that published work, where you're seeing your influences, you're seeing where you want to place yourself in the literary landscape. And that's healthy. That's good for you.
It's very important.
So I would say, coming back to, you know, what specific books should you be reading? Generate for yourself a list of 10 books that you're going to go out and read cover to cover, whether you like them or not, and think about a reason for each one. Think, okay, I want to understand what's been done in my genre. I want to understand what subject matter is maybe related to what I'm doing, where I might need to distinguish myself from it. What's a prize winner in this genre? Then also a book that you've really enjoyed that maybe was part of the inspiration for writing your own book.
Right.
Read that again and think about, okay, what was it in this that I enjoyed? What's the thing that maybe I want to recapture in my writing? I think just have a purpose for each of the books that you seek out. There.
Good advice. Good advice.
Namiford. Sequels.
Sequels.
I'll read this one because you know the answer to this. Do
I do.
editors generally like it when you have a plan for a sequel ready in your mind to discuss, assuming that they plan to publish your manuscript? Is this a desirable marketing feature at this time?
Kind of. So the answer to this is, and we know the answer to this, at least the contemporary answer, because we talked to a whole bunch of editors for, agents for our
Agents
editing,
and editors.
editors for editing and revision course. And the answer they always give us is people from a first-time author, like first-time published author or a fairly new author, the industry does not want to see a trilogy or a multi-part book because they don't know if the first one is going to sell necessarily. So they always told us that the thing you would say if you are planning on doing sequels is, this is a book that is a standalone with series potential. So if the first book works as a book on its own, but there are fastenings within it, let's say, I don't know, I'm trying to think of a better word than that, but you've built in the potential for a sequel, a trilogy perhaps is in your mind, but the book will stand on its own, then they can look at that book as a thing they may want to buy.
Mm-hmm.
And then if it's popular, the fact that there's sequels in the work is great because then, you'll have an audience and you can work on it. But it is rare that a new author would be able to get a trilogy, for example, except
Very rare.
it does happen occasionally, but usually you're not going to market it that way. You do not want a story that, for example, gets to a certain point and then stops.
Yeah, and that's changed over time. I think it maybe used to be the case that it was easier to walk in with a trilogy. That's not the case anymore. The other thing that's really key to keep in mind is you don't actually want to plan too far into your sequel or your second book, because when you do that, you're discounting the fact that there's going to be an entire editorial process that could just rip the carpet right from under you and change everything that you thought you had laid out.
You might work with an editor and remove a character you thought was integral to the next book and then realize that they're gone, and what happened to your plan for the next book?
It's counterproductive. And if you sort of already having a very set idea of what the sequel is going to be makes you more resistant to the editorial process with the first book, that's not a good thing. So you want, for your own sake, and also for the editors and the readers' sake, you don't want to go too far down that road into the sequel. Worry about the first book first.
Yeah.
Racer XLA, finishing the novel. Everyone has shared the challenges of finishing that first draft, the challenges of writing, the art of procrastination, the pitfalls of research, and so on. Ultimately, isn't the goal to finish writing the first draft? If you find your story in blind alleys, characters who are passive, an outline that doesn't seem to work, should we push ourselves to finish the draft? I have a feeling that many, many people start a novel and never finish it for various reasons. If you manage to finish the first draft, you can then continue to rework it until you are satisfied or have had enough. I believe the fear is if we keep writing and feel that we have not completed enough research, have not worked on the characters or the plot, that if the novel is finished, it'll be a piece of junk. The biggest challenge may not be completing the draft. Is this true? Or are there a lot of first drafts floating out there that are in poor shape, never revised?
I would say you are correct. The biggest challenge for a lot of people is actually completing the draft. And I think it's better to have a bad first draft finished than a really polished 50 pages that never gets finished. Because you can't do anything with a really polished 50 pages. But a first draft, and this is Stephen King in his book on writing, likens it to, and I think we may refer to this somewhere in one of our courses,
the hunk of clay.
The hunk of clay. Yeah. So writing a first draft is like making pottery. You go down to the river and you get a bunch of clay and you bring it up to your workshop and you slap it on your table. And that is the first draft. You have something that you can work with. Mm-hmm. And then the rest of the process is shaping, chopping off the stuff that doesn't belong, taking it to a polished piece of pottery ready to be fired. So yeah, I would say there's lots of things that can get in the way, but try and push through. It took me a while as a writer to get over the idea that my first drafts had to be really good. And just be happy with getting something actually complete. And once I did, I was able to produce much more work.
I wish I could take away the vocabulary of good and bad from first drafts. They're not relevant.
Yeah.
I was talking to a thesis student this morning, and one of the issues that this person was having was that, what they wanted their novel to be was this beautiful thing that they could conceptualize. And they were afraid that once they started writing, it was all going to fall apart. And I was saying to them, and I really wish that we could somehow get into the mindset that musicians have. So when you sit down and put that piano concerto in front of you that you've never attempted to play before, is there an expectation that you're going to sit down and sight read it and it's going to be performance ready? No, that's ridiculous. And that's just as ridiculous as saying, when I sit down to write my first draft, it's going to come out perfectly just the way I envision it in my head. That's ridiculous. It's not good or bad. It's just not going to happen. Musicians practice, and they understand that that first sight read through is just to get the shape of it, and then they're going to practice. They're going to focus on different aspects. Sometimes they'll play the whole thing. Sometimes they'll just work on little technically difficult parts. They'll play bits of it for other people to listen to and get feedback. Maybe they go to a master class. When they finally reach performance, which, you know, in my analogy would be that final draft that you're submitting for, you know, for publication, think of all the work that's gone in up to that point. Does it make sense to say, you know, that those initial days of you kind of feeling your way around and learning the notes were good or bad? They weren't good or bad. They were just part of the process. And that's kind of what I want to say about a first draft.
Yeah.
There's no such thing as junk in a first draft. You either have material to work with or you don't.
Yeah.
You're doing your practice or you're not.
Clay from the river.
Clay.
It's a good analogy, actually.
I think there are far more 50 pages in drawers than complete novels in drawers. It gets easier, guys. Like, in a way, this is the big mountain that you're climbing. And then when you go into the revision process, I do feel that that becomes easier because you're able to zoom in and isolate.
You have
more.
something to revise.
You're very conscious, like you know what you're working for, and you have a place to start from.
Yeah.
So it's still a lot of work, and you may have, in terms of, you know, the weeks or months or years that it takes you to finish the project, you may have the lion's share of the time still in front of you, but it's not in many ways as difficult as generating a first draft, I think.
Yeah, I agree.
All right. Do you want to read the next one? Because
yes, Brenda Ann.
A page.
All right.
I'm ready.
Do's and don'ts for creating subplots.
Subplots.
At this late juncture, could you talk a little about the do's and don'ts when including subplots into a story? How might they best reveal a protagonist's backstory, enhance the story's themes, add tension, allow the reader to see a different aspect of a protagonist or other character's personality? Thank you.
So subplot is something that we're going to go into in more detail in course 3, the one that starts in January. We have a whole section on troubleshooting issues that can arise in Act 1, Act 2, Act 3, and subplots is one of these. So I'm going to give you the quick kind of Coles Notes answer, and I printed up some of the materials from there, so you're getting a little sneak peek. But some of the things that we suggest you think about as you're working on subplot. First of all, can you identify what they are? That can be an issue in and of itself. You may realize, I don't actually have any subplots. My protagonist appears in every scene and he's pursuing or she's pursuing whatever the quest is that they're after, and they never go off and deviate, and there's never anything else going on. It's all one level. That might be a problem. So first of all, do you actually have any subplots? I know that screenwriters, the way that they identify subplots is always one character in relationship to another. So you take your protagonist and you list out all the other people in the film, and you say subplot A is the protagonist's relationship to their mother, and then their boss, and then their love interest, and then their, you know, whatever. And you can sort of, and within each of those relationships, screenwriters are looking for development across the course of a film. So first of all, identify what your subplots are. Then ask yourself, how do subplots interplay as your novel advances? Do they alternate in a way that buttresses each storyline and creates interesting emotional dynamics, or do they disappear for long stretches? So are we seeing regular recurrence with these subplots, or are they just being kind of parachuted in at key points because they're a device that allows you to do X? So are they feeling organic, and are they regularly recurring? For each subplot, can you identify some crucial structural points? Inciting incident, rising action, midpoint, crisis, climax. Is every subplot going to have all of these? No, but you want to be looking for these, because what are they telling you? They're telling you that you have development, that you have change in your subplot. If your subplot goes over to a friend's house who is constantly trying to cook a nice meal and always screws it up in some terrible way, and then they laugh about it, and they're the comic relief, and it's just some variation of, oh, look, the eggs are blue, and oh, look, the turkey tastes like popcorn, and oh, look, you're hilarious. And then they go back to their problems. There's no development, right? There's no crisis, no climax, no, and maybe you do want to have a subplot that provides comic relief, but even within that, we want to have some
change
movement
of some sort
that's echoing what's happening in the main story. If your subplots are tangled or confusing, are there any subplots that might be combined or removed for greater clarity? The example that I always give is if you have confessional characters in a novel that a character feels that they can unburden themselves to. You don't often need more than one, and yet it's really easy to have them, they get a bad result at a test at a hospital, and so they say some stuff to the nurse, and then they say some stuff to the taxi driver on the ride home, and then there's their faithful family dog, and they pour their heart out to their dog, and then their husband comes home, and then they, and it's like, how many of these do we need? Can we roll them together to perform the same function? Always the dog. Yeah. Kill the cat, keep the dog. Oh my God. I've just alienated all the cat owners out there. I'm sorry. That was a screenplay joke, because Save the Cat. Right?
Save the Cat is a famous book about writing screenplays.
Okay.
So that was totally metaphorical.
I'm allergic to cats. Sorry, cat people. Does removing a subplot impact the overall narrative? If not, why is it there? Do you need it? Can you just take it out entirely?
Right.
If you have no subplots, what relationship dynamics or conflicts might be developed into subplots to increase complication in your second act and add greater thematic resonance to your novel? So that was a specific part of Brenda Ann's question, was subplot in relation to theme. Should I kick that to you? Do you want to riff on that a little bit? Because I've been talking here.
You're kind of the expert on this. I'm not sure what else I would say.
I mean, subplot is an interesting way of getting at theme. You can have, I think there's sort of two general categories of subplot, very general. Don't hold me to this because there's probably more, but you can have subplots that replicate in miniature what's going on in the big plot. And that's the prime suspect example that I gave you, an echo or a resonance. Then you can have this sort of ironic contrast. So maybe you've got a very serious novel, but you do have the little comic subplot with the neighbor and the blue chicken or whatever it was. So you can provide sort of ironic tension and ironic juxtaposition there. And theme is gotten at in this way.
Oh, sure. And I think, that's something that in the book I'm writing now, I'm realizing that there are subplots that echo the main theme, which is distance and the things that it allows you to do, distance from other people, distance from your actions. And that's something that's taken me a while to sort of tease out. But as I do, I realize, I just have to sort of, position these subplots, these other relationships. It all naturally came out of the story anyway. It felt for me. So they're more echoes or mirrors than.
But I think that's actually, that's a really neat place to see theme kind of thrown into relief, right? Because you can say, okay, if one is echoing the other, what is the commonality? What is the thing that they're both dealing with?
Yeah.
That's probably your thematic material. Or if it's providing a contrast, maybe the comic relief example is not quite specific enough, but if your main story is an unhappy love story, and then I'm thinking, okay, Anna Karenina, great example. You've got the main story with Anna and the guy whose name I can't remember, the officer, whatever, which is a tragic love story. But underneath that, you've got Kitty and Levin, which ends up being a very happy love story. They get married and it's all good at the end, right? So there is a counterpoint there that points to the thematic material that Tolstoy is dealing with.
And you can also do them at different levels of abstraction. Some subplots can be much more pointed and some could be much more subtle than others.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. So hopefully that's helpful to you, Brenda Ann. And like I say, we do go into this in more detail when we talk about revising in course 3, but that's the quick little primer on the bulk of the material that we're going to cover.
Yes, and that actually brings us to the last question, which we have.
Which is not a question.
Which is not a question. It was a thank you from Jackie Morrison.
Oh.
Thank you for the Hangouts and the vastness of the videos, and thanks for getting so many writers to talk on the videos.
You're most welcome, Jackie Morrison.
Yes, indeed.
Thank you for your kind words. Thank you to all of you for sharing your time and your wonderful projects with us and letting us get these little glimpses.
And please keep in touch. There's a few things. The
Yes.
last part of the course, there's a survey. We also have information about an online forum we set up if you wish to use that to connect with each other after the course.
Yeah, it's a way of keeping in touch. Do you want to say a little bit more about that?
It's still early days with that forum, so we have some people from the last class in there. It's a little bit quiet right now, but we're welcoming people in to start it up.
And you built this in response to actually
Requests from
learners'
people.
demand. Like people said, well, how can we stay in touch after the courses are done? And that's how. So please
so we
check
created
it
a
out.
space. Yeah, there's a link and a secret answer to the secret question on the website. And also, as you go on in your writing careers, let us know if you have successes. We're always interested in hearing back from you, especially if this course has helped you create a novel that ends up satisfying you in some way.
Yeah, and we've
It doesn't have to be publication, but publication
we
is
have
nice.
heard about our first publication or two that are kind of in the pipeline,
Yeah.
coming out of work that people did in these courses, which is super exciting. And we would love to have you keep in touch with us. And we wish you all good things as you carry on with your writing. You guys have wonderful novels in the works. Continue to have faith in yourself. Sit down, get those words down.
Yes, do the
Whatever
work.
your
Do the
writing
work.
practice is, bum in the seat and do the work, and you will get there. If this is what you want, you will get there as long as you stick with it. And don't psych yourself out, and don't procrastinate, and don't tell yourself that it's a piece of junk. Remember, for the early draft, no value judgments. They don't apply.
And there
Just
is
work.
And there is a certain satisfaction that you should pat yourself on the back because when you finish a draft, because no matter what's happened, no matter what you think of it, you have written the draft of a novel, and that is not nothing. That is
not everyone
nothing
can say that. You wrote a novel.
Yeah.
My goodness. All right, go forth and write, and we will look forward to seeing you in some
fashion,
some future iteration of yourself down the road. Keep in touch. Good luck with the writing. See you soon.
Bye.
Oh, it's always a bit sad at the end.